The emergency room was loud that night, the kind of loud that never really stopped. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Stretchers rolled past one after another. The smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat, and fear hung in the air. Everyone was moving fast, but nothing felt fully under control. She stood near the nurse's station, reviewing charts with steady hands. She was not new to stress, but she was new to this hospital. Most people only knew her as the quiet nurse who worked hard and spoke less. She did her job, followed rules, and stayed out of gossip that made her easy to ignore. A trauma call came in without much warning. A man was being rushed from a military base outside the city. The report was short and tense. Severe injuries, blood loss, internal damage suspected. High priority. When the doors burst open, the energy in the room shifted. The man on the stretcher was tall, broad-shouldered, even in his broken state. His body showed signs of heavy training. Old scars crossed his arms and chest. His breathing was shallow, uneven. His face was pale, but tight with control, even while unconscious. Doctors moved in quickly. Orders were shouted. Tubes were placed. Blood was drawn. The room filled with voices speaking over one another. It was controlled chaos, the kind the ER saw every day. She stepped closer, watching everything. She noticed things others didn't seem to. His left hand twitched every few seconds. His jaw tightened whenever a sharp sound echoed. When someone raised their voice, his heart rate spiked slightly on the monitor. She leaned closer to read his breathing pattern. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, but incomplete. Like everyone was looking at the obvious wounds and missing something underneath. One of the doctors called out numbers, listing vitals. Another focused on scans. They talked about surgery, about waiting for confirmation. Time stretched then. She cleared her throat softly. "His breathing pattern is changing," she said. Her voice was calm, not loud. "It's reacting to sound." No one answered. A doctor waved her off without looking. "We'll handle it." She stayed where she was. She had learned long ago that silence could cost lives. She watched again. When someone mentioned moving him, his fingers curled, his heart rate jumped. She spoke again, still calm. "He's not fully unconscious. He's responding." This time someone glanced at her, annoyed. "He's sedated." She shook her head slightly. "Not fully. He's fighting it." That caught a few looks. One doctor frowned. "Based on what?" "Experience," she said. "An observation." A short laugh came from across the bed. "We don't have time for guesses." She didn't argue. She moved closer to the patient, lowering her voice near his ear. She spoke slowly, evenly, the way she had learned years ago. "You're safe," she said. "You're in a hospital. Stay with us." His breathing steadied for a moment. The monitor reflected it. A few seconds passed. The change was small, but real. She straightened. "See." The room went quiet for half a second. Then the lead doctor frowned. "That doesn't change the plan." She wanted to say more. She wanted to explain that she had seen this before, in places far from clean hospital floors. That some people were trained to stay alert even while fading. That calm voices matter more than machines sometimes. But she said none of that. She just watched. As they prepared to move him, his breathing grew shallow again. His hand clenched hard. Sweat formed along his temples. She felt in her chest. This was the moment. Waiting could make things worse. She stepped forward. "He needs support now, not later. If we move him like this, he could crash." The doctor snapped his head toward her. "Are you giving medical orders?" "I'm giving a warning." Another doctor sighed loudly. "Enough. Step back." She hesitated for 1 second too long. That second mattered. The patient's monitor alarmed. Sharp and loud. His heart rate dropped suddenly. Someone cursed under their breath. Hands moved faster now. The room filled with tension. She acted without thinking. She adjusted the position, supported his airway the way she knew best. She spoke to him again, steady and firm. "Stay with me," she said. "Don't let go." The monitor responded. Not perfectly, but enough. His breathing caught. His heart rate stabilized just enough to buy time. Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. The lead doctor turned slowly. His face was red, not with fear, but anger. "Who told you to do that?" "No one," she said. "You broke protocol. I prevented a collapse. That is not your call." Security was already being signaled. She could see it in the way another nurse avoided her eyes. "I was trained to act when seconds matter," she said quietly. "This is a hospital, not wherever you think you learned that." The doctor snapped. 2 security guards appeared at the door. The room felt smaller suddenly. "Escort her out," the doctor said. "We'll deal with this later." She stepped back, hands raised slightly. She didn't resist. She took one last look at the man on the bed. His face was tense but alive, still fighting. As she was let out, the noise of the ER swallowed her again. Doors closed behind her. The cold air of the hallway hit her skin. She stood there for a moment, stunned, fired, just like that. No questions, no review, no chance to explain. Inside the trauma room, doctors rushed the patient toward surgery. No one spoke her name. No one asked why his vitals had stabilized when they did. Outside, she walked toward the exit slowly. Her badge felt heavier than it should. She had followed her instincts, the same ones that had saved lives before. Tonight, they had cost her job. She pushed through the hospital doors into the night, unaware that the man she had helped was about to wake up and ask a question that would change everything. The hall outside the emergency room was quiet compared to the chaos she had left behind. The fluorescent lights hummed above her head, harsh and unkind. Her badge weighed heavily on her chest, and every step felt like she was carrying more than herself. She had been fired. Just like that, the words from the doctor's mouth replayed in her mind over and over, like a broken record. "Escort her out. We'll deal with this later." She stopped in the empty corridor, leaning against the wall. The adrenaline that carried her through the ER began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its place. Her hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from frustration of being ignored, of doing everything she could and being punished for it. She thought about the patient, the man she had tried to protect, and wondered if her actions had really made a difference. Security followed her quietly, professional and unemotional. They didn't say much, just walked beside her until she reached the hospital's main exit. She stepped out into the night, the cool air brushing against her skin. It felt like a release and a punishment at the same time. The city was alive outside, but she felt invisible, as if no one could see her at all. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, afraid it might be someone calling to yell at her or worse, to confirm that her termination was final. When she finally looked, it was a message from a friend who worked in another department. "Are you okay? I heard what happened." She stared at it, fingers hovering over the screen. How could she be okay? She had just lost her job for trying to save a life. She typed back slowly, her thumbs heavy. "I don't know. I did what I thought was right. And now I'm out." She sent the message and dropped her phone back into her pocket. She walked down the street, letting the city lights guide her aimlessly. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to move, to keep moving, or she might stop entirely. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the patient was being prepped for surgery. The room was tense. Machines beeped rapidly, monitors flashing warnings. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, but the calm, steady presence that had stabilized them was gone. Without her, the rhythm she created, the quiet influence she had on the man's body and mind, was missing. Minutes felt like hours as the surgical team worked. His vitals were unstable, fluctuating rapidly. One nurse whispered a prayer under her breath, a small attempt to fill the gap left by the one who had been fired. But nothing seemed to stick. The tension in the room thickened, unspoken but palpable. Outside, she wandered aimlessly, her mind refusing to quiet itself. She thought about every decision she had made, every moment in the ER that night. She thought about the way he clutched at the sheets, the way his fingers twitched when he was moved, the way a simple word could change his heartbeat. She remembered his eyes, closed yet alert in some strange way, even in unconsciousness. It made her chest ache, the knowledge that she had left behind. Hours passed. She didn't notice how far she had walked. The city changed around her, streets emptying, lights dimming. the night settling deeper. She found herself near a small park, benches empty, leaves rustling in the wind. She sat on one of them, letting her back slump against the metal frame. Her thoughts turned inward, to questions she didn't have answers for. Had she failed him? Had she done enough? Then, without warning, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer it, expecting bad news or another confrontation. But the voice on the other end was different. Calm, firm, commanding. "Where's my nurse?" The words froze her in place. Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Where's my nurse?" The voice repeated, sharper this time. "The one who stabilized me in the ER. Bring her back." Her mind raced. Who could be demanding her return with such authority? She knew instinctively that it was the patient, the man she had left behind, the one whose life had been in her hands just hours ago. But she had no idea how he knew her name, or why he had the power to demand her back. Inside the hospital, the surgical team had finally stabilized him enough to move him to recovery. He opened his eyes briefly, scanning the room, searching. His gaze was sharp, focused, and then it landed on the head nurse, who was busy with paperwork. He asked quietly but insistently, "Where's my nurse?" The staff exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to admit that she had been fired. The man repeated himself, a quiet insistence in his voice that made the room tense. "I need my nurse, the one who saved me." The head nurse swallowed hard and finally spoke. She's not here. She was escorted out. She was let go." The man's jaw tightened. He leaned back slightly, his breathing controlled but deliberate. "Bring her back." The word echoed in the room, simple and commanding. Everyone paused. There was something in his tone, something that carried authority without arrogance, that demanded respect without explanation. The staff began to scramble, making calls, trying to locate the nurse who had disappeared into the night. Meanwhile, she sat on the park bench, staring at the phone in her hand, still trying to process what had just happened. The realization sank in slowly, the weight of it pressing down on her. The patient, this man, was alive because of her, and now he wanted her back. Her mind flipped through memories of the ER, of his shallow breathing, of the way she had leaned close and spoken to him, of the tiny adjustments that had kept him alive. Every moment replayed vividly, each one a reminder that she had acted not for recognition, but because it was the only choice she could make. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She stood, gripping her bag, and began walking back toward the hospital. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also purposeful. She wasn't just returning to a building. She was returning to the life she had saved, to the moment where her actions mattered more than rules or protocol. Inside the hospital, the staff prepared for her arrival, tension thick in the air. Doctors who had dismissed her before now looked uneasy. Nurses whispered quietly among themselves, unsure what would happen next. The man in recovery, still pale and weak, waited. His eyes scanned the room for her, finally landing on the door. When she entered, the room seemed to hold its breath. She walked steadily toward the bed, not meeting anyone's eyes but his. He reached out slightly, a faint gesture that spoke louder than words. "You came," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I'm here," she replied simply. For a moment, the room felt suspended, as if the chaos of the ER, the tension of the night, and the weight of authority all hung in balance. She had been fired, dismissed, ignored, but she had returned. And in that return, she knew that everything she had done mattered more than anything anyone could say. The surgical team continued their work, but now there was a calm presence in the room. She moved quietly, checking lines, adjusting monitors, speaking softly to the patient. Each word, each touch, seemed to anchor him, to keep him tethered to life and clarity. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, oblivious to the small miracle unfolding inside. But within the walls of that recovery room, a nurse and a patient had found a connection stronger than protocol, stronger than fear, stronger than anger. It was the kind of connection that could not be measured by charts or procedures. It was the kind that saved lives. And in that moment, She understood something important. She had acted alone before, and she had been punished. But now, with him awake and insisting, with authority behind her, she had returned not as a subordinate, not as someone to be ignored, but as the person who mattered most in that room. Her job, her role, her recognition. It didn't matter as much as the life she had fought to preserve. And for the first time since leaving the ER, she felt a spark of hope, the knowledge that she had made a real difference. The man's eyes followed her movements carefully. Every step she took, every adjustment she made, he seemed to understand. It was as if he could feel her presence in a way no one else could. The authority he carried didn't need words. His respect was earned through experience, through understanding what had been done for him when he had been at his weakest. She stayed with him, quietly observing, quietly adjusting, quietly speaking. Each small action brought stability. Each calm word reinforced his grip on life. For the first time since being fired, she felt in control not because of rules or orders, but because of her knowledge, her instincts, and her care. Hours passed. The hospital was quieter now, night deepening around the building. Outside, the streets were nearly empty. Inside, the patient rested more steadily than he had in hours. And the nurse, once dismissed and escorted out, now stood at the center of the recovery, calm, attentive, and unwavering. The night had not been easy. She had been fired. She had been ignored. But she had returned. And in that return, she realized that sometimes recognition comes not from rules or titles, but from the people whose lives you touch when it matters most. The room settled into quiet hums of machines and the gentle rhythm of controlled breathing. She watched him, ready for anything, knowing that the battle was not over, but also knowing that she'd been seen, and in that sight, found a quiet strength she had not felt before. The hospital was quieter now, but not peaceful. The emergency room had settled into a low hum, the kind that comes after chaos, but still carries tension beneath it. Machines beeped steadily. Monitors flashed in soft rhythm, and the night staff moved through the halls with measured steps. The nurse stayed at the bedside, her eyes scanning the monitors and the patient's face, alert to every small change. She knew that even a small shift in his vitals could mean everything, and she refused to take her eyes off him for a second. The man in the bed was finally awake, his breathing more stable but still shallow. His eyes, sharp and focused despite weakness, searched the room, scanning every face, every movement. He had survived the initial trauma, but he was not yet out of danger. He needed care that went beyond medication and surgery. He needed someone who understood how to keep him grounded when the world around him was spinning out of control. "Where's my nurse?" he asked again, his voice stronger than before but still weak. The words were deliberate, carrying authority that made the room fall silent. Staff members looked at each other nervously. Whispers started, a quiet tension spreading to the recovery area. The question was simple, but it carried weight. The head nurse stepped forward, hesitating. She cleared her throat. She's not here," she said carefully. She was let go earlier tonight. The man's eyes narrowed. He pushed himself slightly up on the bed, ignoring the discomfort in his body. "Bring her back," he said, every word precise, commanding attention. "I need my nurse. Now." The staff exchanged uneasy glances. The situation had changed. This was no ordinary patient. He wasn't just demanding her return. He was insisting, and there was a quiet threat in the authority behind his voice. Phones began to ring as administrators were called. Calls went out to security and human resources, trying to locate the nurse who had disappeared into the night. Outside the hospital, the nurse had barely begun to catch her breath from a night's chaos. She had walked without direction for hours, letting the city streets carry her wherever they might. The call had startled her at first, but the insistence in the man's voice left no room for doubt. She knew immediately that he was alive, that he had recognized her actions, and that he needed her. She hurried back to the hospital, her steps quick but careful. Her mind raced as she considered what she would face when she returned. Doctors who had dismissed her before were still there. Security had escorted her out earlier. There would be questions, arguments, maybe even confrontation. But she didn't stop. She had to return, not for the job, not for recognition, but for the life she had helped to save. When she arrived, the staff parted slightly, unsure how to react. Some faces were pale with anxiety. Others avoided her eyes. The man in the bed lifted his head just enough to see her enter, his eyes locking onto hers. He gave a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement that she was exactly where she needed to be. She moved to his side without hesitation, adjusting his position gently. "You're doing well," she said softly. "We're keeping you stable. Just relax and focus on breathing with me." Her voice was calm, steady, the way she had spoken to him before. The effect was immediate. His breathing slowed, evened out, and the tension in his shoulders softened. The doctors watched, unsure what to say. They had acted on protocol, relying on charts, orders, and procedures. But here was a nurse, someone they had dismissed, whose instincts and observation were keeping the patient alive in a way their training could not. It was frustrating, humbling, and undeniable all at once. He looked at her, his eyes sharp. "I felt it. When you were here earlier, even before I fully woke, you kept me steady. No one else could do that. Not like you." She hesitated, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "I did what I had to. That's all." "No," he said, his tone firm but not angry. "That's not all. That's why I asked for you. I need you, and I will not have anyone else take your place." The room seemed to hold its breath. The staff exchanged glances, realizing that the situation was no longer about hierarchy or titles. This was about life, survival, and the quiet authority of someone who knew what they were doing in a way that others couldn't understand without experience. The head nurse finally spoke, her voice shaking slightly. We'll get her officially back on the schedule. We'll fix the paperwork." The man shook his head. "Don't worry about that. Just make sure she stays with me. That's all that matters right now." Hours passed. She remained at his side, checking monitors, adjusting four lines, and speaking to him quietly. Every small action mattered. The angle of the bed, the placement of the oxygen mask, the tone of her voice. She had learned over years of experience that these details could mean the difference between stability and collapse. As the night deepened, the man finally began to relax. His breathing was steady, his hand unclenching slowly from sheets. He spoke occasionally, asking questions, giving small commands, acknowledging her presence in ways that made it clear he trusted her implicitly. She watched him carefully, noting every detail. The subtle shifts in his eyes, the way his fingers moved, the tension in his jaw. She adjusted her care based on observation, not protocol. Every instinct, every small decision, was focused on keeping him alive and alert. The hospital staff began to understand something important through observation. They saw the calm presence she brought, the way the patient responded to her. They saw that her dismissal had been a mistake, and they felt the tension of that realization. Some felt embarrassment. Others felt awe. But all of them understood that she was different from anyone else in the room. Outside, the night passed quietly. The city was calm, unaware of the life and death drama unfolding inside the hospital. Inside, the nurse continued her careful watch, ensuring that the patient remained stable. Every few minutes, she adjusted monitors, repositioned his body, and spoke softly to keep him grounded. Finally, as dawn began to break, the first light spilling into recovery room, the man looked at her with a faint smile. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "You don't need to," she replied simply. "Just stay alive. That's enough." He nodded. "No, you deserve more than that. You saved my life when no one else would listen. That's worth more than words." She shook her head, focusing on the monitors again. "I was just doing my job." He looked at her with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. "Your job saved me. That's all that matters. And I will make sure everyone knows it." The staff watched silently. They had learned a hard lesson that night. That life sometimes depended on instinct, on calm observation, on quiet authority that could not be ignored. They had dismissed her before, but now they understood that she held something rare, something that could not be taught in a classroom or printed in a manual. She remained at his side, keeping him steady as the first rays of sunlight touched the hospital walls. The night had been long, filled with tension, fear, and uncertainty, but it had ended with clarity. She had returned, and her presence had made all the difference. The man in the bed, the patient who had been so close to death, now rested more comfortably. He trusted her completely, relied on her quietly, and respected the authority she brought not from title but from skill and presence. She had been fired hours earlier, but now she stood at the center of his recovery, calm, observant, and unwavering. And in that moment, she realized something important. Recognition, titles, and hierarchy were meaningless compared to the life she had saved. The patient's trust, his need, his acknowledgement, those were what mattered. She had returned not for the job, not for approval, but for the moment where her care was needed most. The hospital around them continued its routine, but the nurse and the patient shared something unique, an unspoken understanding that had formed in the most critical hours of life and death. It was a bond forged in chaos, solidified by trust and defined by the quiet, steady care that had kept a man alive when everything else seemed uncertain. She stayed there, watching, adjusting, speaking softly, making sure that he remained grounded. Every small action was deliberate. Every word mattered. She had been dismissed, ignored, and underestimated, but now she held the authority that came from knowing a life depended on her. The man looked at her again, his eyes searching. "I needed you," he said simply. "And I'm here," she replied, calm but firm. For the first time that night, the weight she carried, the dismissal, the doubt, the fear, felt lighter. She had returned, and her presence mattered more than any title, any rule, any reprimand. The night had tested her, the hospital had judged her, but in this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be. The sun continued to rise, spilling light into the room. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, a nurse and her patient had created a space where skill, care, and trust mattered more than anything else. And in that space, life had been saved. The morning light spilled into the recovery room, soft and golden, making the machines hum less threateningly than the night before. The man in the bed was awake now, alert enough to follow instructions, but weak from the trauma and blood loss he had endured. Every breath he took was measured, careful, controlled, and his eyes tracked the nurse's every movement. She had been there all night, quietly, steadily, making small adjustments to 4 lines, monitoring his vitals, repositioning him for comfort, and speaking softly to keep him calm. The room was silent, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional whisper from a nurse checking a chart. The head nurse hovered nearby, uneasy. She could feel the tension building in her chest, knowing that the patient's insistence on having this particular nurse back was more than just preference. It carried weight she could not fully understand. The man finally spoke, his voice firm but low. "I need to speak to the hospital administration." The head nurse nodded nervously, her fingers fidgeting with a pen. I can arrange that. What exactly do you need?" "I need them to know that she is the only one qualified to care for me right now. She saved my life, and she deserves to be recognized. I want to return to the ER, fully reinstated." The words hit the staff hard. They had dismissed her hours ago, called it insubordination, ignored the evidence that she had stabilized him. And now, they were being confronted with undeniable truth. The man sitting weakly in that bed was not just any patient. He had survived where others might not, and it was because of the nurse they had fired. Administrators arrived shortly, faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. They asked questions, trying to understand the situation. One asked why she had been fired. Another explained that she had broken protocol, acted without orders, and been escorted out by security. The man leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp despite his weakness. "You fired the nurse who saved me. That was a mistake. She acted with skill, with knowledge, and with authority when you ignored the warning signs. I do not question your protocol, but I will not allow it to override competence." The administrators exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to argue with him. His tone carried quiet power, the kind that made people listen without fear but with respect. "She has experience that you do not understand," he continued. "Her knowledge of emergency care under extreme conditions is rare. She stabilized me when every second mattered. She is the reason I am alive right now. You need to bring her back immediately." The hospital staff began scrambling. Calls were made, paperwork prepared, and security was informed that her presence was now requested, not for discussion but as a matter of life and death. The head nurse finally spoke quietly to the man in the bed. "She will be back. We'll fix this." The nurse, meanwhile, was waiting just outside the hospital, her bag slung over her shoulder, phone in hand. She had been trying to process everything from the night before, her mind running through every moment, every decision. The call from the patient had shaken her, but it had also given her purpose. Now, as she received a message requesting her immediate return, she felt a mixture of relief and determination. She entered the hospital quietly, almost unnoticed at first, but the moment she stepped into the recovery room, all eyes turned. The patient's face brightened with recognition. He managed a faint smile, despite his exhaustion. "Finally," he said. She moved to his side, without hesitation. "I'm here," she replied softly. "We'll keep you steady." The administrators and staff watched, realizing that her presence had changed everything. It was no longer about rules or protocol. It was about competence, instinct, and care that could not be ignored. The man in the bed was alive because of her. That simple truth was undeniable. The conversation turned to a reinstatement. The administrators were careful, speaking politely but firmly. "We understand the situation. We will restore your position immediately. Your actions were extraordinary under the circumstances." She nodded, keeping her attention on the patient. "Thank you. Let's focus on keeping him stable first." The man in the bed gave a faint nod of approval. "Focus on what matters most," he said. "Recognition can wait, but competence cannot." It became clear to everyone in the room that her methods had been unconventional but effective. She had acted with precision and observation that went beyond protocol. The subtle adjustments she had made, the way she monitored his breathing, the calm tone she had used, the positioning that allowed his circulation to stabilize, were all actions learned in environments far from a standard hospital floor. Her experience was now being acknowledged, not through words on paper, but through the undeniable results of her care. The hospital administration worked quickly to correct the earlier mistake. Security was informed that she was no longer to be prevented from accessing the patient. Official orders reinstated her to her position. She moved calmly, checking the monitors, adjusting for lines, speaking softly to the patient, and observing every subtle change in his condition. The room became a place of quiet focus rather than tension, a space where life and skill were the only priorities. The man in the bed finally spoke again, his voice still weak but strong with conviction. "You need to understand something," he said. "What you call protocol can save lives, yes. But it is a human touch, the knowledge and the presence that often make the difference between life and death. She is all of these. Do not forget it." The administrators and doctors listened, the weight of his words sinking in. They had underestimated her. They had dismissed her. And now, they had to recognize that she held a rare skill, one that could not be replaced by rules or charts. She remained at his side, providing care, answering questions, and guiding the staff in subtle ways. Her presence had authority not because of title, but because of competence. Every movement was precise. Every word was deliberate. The patient responded instantly to her guidance. She had become the anchor in a room that had been chaotic just hours before. The man looked at her again, his expression serious. "You need to know that what you did tonight mattered more than you realize. You didn't just save me. You saved every moment that followed. Every decision I made while I was barely conscious. You held control when I couldn't. That is something few people can do." She shook her head, focusing on the monitors. "I just acted. That's all." "No," he said firmly. "It's never just acting. It's knowledge, observation, and presence. And you have it. Don't underestimate that." The staff around them absorbed the exchange silently. It was a lesson in humility. It was a lesson in trust. It was a lesson that some knowledge could only be understood through action, not lecture, not textbook, not protocol. Hours passed. The patient's vitals stabilized completely under her watch. Each small adjustment she made reinforces recovery. Her calm presence created a rhythm that the hospital staff began to follow instinctively. They watched her, learning without being told, understanding that her care was precise, deliberate, and effective. Finally, as the morning shifted into afternoon, the man's condition had improved significantly. The tension that filled the room was replaced with quiet relief. He looked at her, eyes bright despite fatigue. "Thank you," he said simply. "You don't need to thank me. she replied. Just focus on resting. No, he said. I will thank you. I will make sure everyone understands what you did. You were the difference. The room was silent, absorbing the weight of his words. For the first time, the nurse allowed herself a small smile. She had been dismissed, ignored, and even escorted out, but now her expertise had been recognized, not through ceremony, not through paperwork, but through the simple truth that she had kept someone alive when it mattered most. The administrators finalized the paperwork for her reinstatement. Doctors adjusted schedules to ensure she remained available for the patient. Staff members approached quietly, offering apologies or simply observing her work with newfound respect. And through it all, she stayed focused on the patient, monitoring his condition, adjusting care, and speaking softly. She had been recognized not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through skill, attention, and calm authority. The man in the bed reached out his hand slightly, a gesture of trust and acknowledgement. She took it, her hand steady, offering support. We're getting through this, she said. Yes, he replied, and it's because of you. The day stretched on, but the nurse remained at his side. Each small action reinforced stability. Each calm word kept him grounded. The recognition she had long deserved had finally arrived, not through ceremony or praise, but through the undeniable proof of her care. In the quiet moments between monitoring and adjustments, she realized something important. Competence, presence, and instinct mattered more than protocol. Life depended on action when it counted, and her actions had saved a life. That was recognition enough. And yet, finally, the world around her was beginning to see it too. The man's eyes followed her, a silent message passing between them. You were right. I needed you. I'm here, she said, her voice calm and steady. And in that moment, the hospital, the staff, and the patient all understood the truth. Some people are invaluable, not because of titles or rules, but because they hold the power to save lives when everything else fails. The recovery room felt different that morning. The tension and chaos of the previous night had faded, replaced by quiet focus and controlled calm. The patient lay in the bed, his body still weak, but his vitals steady. Machines beeped softly, and sunlight spilled to the windows, casting a warm glow over the room. It was a kind of light that made everything feel softer, safer, more possible. The nurse remained at his side, her hands steady as she adjusted monitors and checked 4 lines. Every movement was deliberate, practiced, careful. She had learned over years in emergency care that even small actions could mean the difference between life and death. And tonight, she had proven that skill mattered more than rules, more than titles, more than protocol. The man looked at her, his gaze steady despite fatigue. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice weak but sincere. You saved my life. I wouldn't be here without you. She shook her head, keeping her attention on his monitors. You don't need to thank me. Just focus on resting and getting stronger. No, he said firmly. You need to hear it. You were there when it counted. You stayed calm, you acted with skill, and you didn't let anyone else's mistakes put me in danger. That matters more than you realize. Her chest tightened. She had been fired just hours earlier, dismissed as someone who had overstepped, ignored, even escorted out. And yet here she was, reinstated, recognized, and standing at the center of the man's recovery. It was a strange mix of relief and pride, but mostly it was quiet satisfaction. She had done her job, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Hospital administrators had returned, their expressions careful but respectful. They had come to see the results for themselves, to understand what had happened and how a nurse who had been dismissed hours ago had managed to stabilize a critically injured patient. They watched silently as she moved through the room, adjusting equipment, monitoring his vitals, speaking softly to keep him calm. One of the administrators finally spoke, their voice low and measured. We underestimated your skills last night. It's clear now that your actions saved his life. We owe you an apology. She nodded, eyes still on the patient. I was only doing what I could to help. The man in the bed spoke then, his voice calm but firm. It's more than that. You didn't just help. You led when no one else could. You stayed steady when everyone else panicked. That's worth more than an apology or recognition. That's worth respect. The room was quiet, everyone absorbing the weight of his words. The doctors who had dismissed her, who had questioned her actions, who had called security, all of them now understood the truth. This nurse had acted with knowledge and instinct that could not be ignored. She had stabilized a life in critical condition when others had hesitated. That was proof, undeniable and clear. Hours passed as she continued her watch over him. She adjusted monitors, checked medication lines, and repositioned him for comfort. Each small action mattered, and the patient responded instantly to her care. His breathing steadied, his color improved, and the tension in his muscles eased under her steady presence. Finally, as afternoon approached, he looked at her with a faint but genuine smile. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice still hoarse. "I've been through situations that most people can't imagine. I've been trained to survive in impossible conditions. And even I can tell you this, what you did last night was extraordinary. You saved me when no one else could." She felt a lump in her throat, but kept her voice calm. "I did what I had to. That's all." "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "It's never just what you had to do. It's skill, judgment, courage, and presence. You had all of it. You stayed calm when everything else was chaotic. You made decisions that mattered. You're more than a nurse. You're someone who can hold a life together when the world is falling apart." The hospital staff around them watched quietly. Some felt ashamed for dismissing her. Others felt awe at her presence, at the quiet authority she brought without raising her voice or demanding attention. She had earned their respect not by words, but by action, and now they could see it clearly. The administrator spoke again, this time more formally. "We will ensure that your position is secure. Your expertise is needed here. You have demonstrated exceptional skill, and we cannot allow it to go unrecognized or unused." She nodded, keeping her focus on the patient. Titles and positions no longer mattered. What mattered was that she had been trusted, recognized for her competence, and allowed to do what she did best. The man in the bed reached out his hand slightly. She took it, her grip steady, offering support and reassurance. "We'll get through this together," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, "and it's because of you. You stayed when others hesitated. You acted when others doubted. You held control when it mattered most." The day continued, and the patient's condition improved steadily. The nurse remained vigilant, offering quiet guidance and reassurance. Her presence was a stabilizing force, not just for him, but for the entire team. Doctors and nurses began to follow her lead, observing the techniques she used, learning without being taught, understanding the value of instinct, experience, and calm authority in moments of crisis. The man spoke again, his voice low but intense. "You need to understand something important. Life isn't just about rules, procedures, or titles. Life is about action, observation, and knowing when to step in. You have all of that. Never doubt it." She shook her head, smiling faintly. "I just do my job." "No," he said firmly. "You do more than that. You saved a life when it counted. That is something rare. That is something powerful. And you deserve to know it." As evening approached, the room was filled with quiet understanding. The nurse had been reinstated officially, her skills recognized, and the patient was stable and resting. She had faced dismissal, criticism, and disbelief, yet she had returned and proven herself through action and care. The man in the bed looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with respect and gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. "I will never forget what you did." She nodded, her voice calm and steady. "Just focus on getting better. That's enough." "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "It's never enough to just get better. You saved my life. You earned my respect, and you earned recognition. You will always be remembered for this." The hospital staff remained silent, absorbing the truth of the moment. They had witnessed a quiet but extraordinary heroism, a display of competence, presence, and care that could not be ignored. They had learned a lesson in humility and in respect for skill, instinct, and calm authority in moments of crisis. As night fell, the nurse finally allowed herself to step back for a moment. She had been through chaos, dismissal, and doubt, but now she stood to center of life saved, of recognition earned, and of respect given. The patient's hand still rested lightly on hers, a silent acknowledgement of trust and gratitude. She knew that her work would continue, that challenges would come again, but in this moment, everything had shifted. She had been tested, dismissed, and doubted, and yet she had returned to prove the value of calm authority, careful observation, and unwavering care. The patient rested, breathing steadily, finally at ease. The nurse watched, ensuring that stability remained, guiding, adjusting, and speaking softly. The hospital had recognized her skill, but more importantly, a life had been saved because of her. The man spoke once more, his voice quiet but firm. "You were the difference. Never forget that." She smiled faintly, keeping her attention on him. "I won't. Now rest. That's all that matters." And in that quiet, soft-lit room, the nurse understood something deeply. True recognition comes not from titles or positions, but from the undeniable impact of one life saved by another. The chaos, the dismissal, the doubt, they had all been overcome by care, skill, and presence. She had faced the worst, returned, and proven that when it mattered most, her place was here, saving lives and guiding the fragile moments between survival and tragedy. The hospital had learned a lesson they would not forget. The patient had survived because of one nurse who acted with skill, courage, and calm authority. And that nurse had earned respect not through words, but through action, care, and the quiet power of human dedication. The room fell into quiet peace as the night deepened. Machines continued their steady hum. The patient rested comfortably, safe in the care of someone who understood what mattered most. And the nurse remained, alert, steady, and unwavering, knowing that the life she had saved and the trust she had earned were the truest rewards of all. She had been fired. She had been dismissed. She had been doubted. But in the end, she had returned and everything had changed. Lives were saved. Respect was earned. Recognition had come, quietly but powerfully, because when it counted, she had been there. And that was more than enough.